between now and 3 o'clock, we're going to hear from Amanda Reiman, and from then Donald Abrams as soon as he gets here. And they're going to be sharing with us some of their research. And then we'll have a break till 3:15, and then at 3:15 we'll have Clint Werner talking about cannabis, cancer, and Alzheimer's. And then we'll have Sue Sisley talking about some of her MAPS-sponsored research into the potential for cannabis to treat PTSD and some of the roadblocks she's run into in trying to do that work. And then Lyle Craker, Professor Craker, will talk to us some about his work trying to provide an alternative source of marijuana for researchers who are trying to take marijuana through the FDA approval process. And I can talk some about the legal battle that we've been fighting on Dr. Craker's behalf, which is something I've been involved in now for more years than I like to admit. If you'd like, you can join us up here, Dr. Craker, or you can wait back there. Either way is fine. Donald will be here in a few minutes, and I've said to all the people who are going to be presenting, we'd like to have you up here, but you don't have to sit up here the whole 4 hours. I know that might be a little bit uncomfortable, but I really want to try to generate as much of a discussion and spirited question and answer period as I can, both among the speakers and with you in the audience. So with that, I will let you begin, Amanda, and you can introduce yourself and tell us what you've been working on.
Okay, so hi everyone, welcome back. Hopefully people were able to take advantage of the fabulous old Oakland farmers market right outside. So my name is Amanda Reiman, and I am a public health researcher. So my training is in social welfare. I have a PhD in social welfare, and I did my doctoral dissertation on medical cannabis dispensaries, which people joke only in Berkeley could you do a doctoral dissertation on medical cannabis dispensaries. But I was really interested in them from a health service provision side. I knew there was a lot more going on in dispensaries than was shown in the media. You know, they would have you think that we're all just sitting there, and, you know, in pot up to our waists, doing pot angels on the ground while the money just falls from the ceiling. And I knew that that was not true. Back in 2005, there were a lot of medical cannabis dispensaries in San Francisco. There were over 40. And they were all different. You would have two dispensaries on the same street with completely different vibes. You know, one you walk in and it's hip hop and graffiti and neon, and the other you walk in and it's like, you know, white college kids playing Scrabble and, you know, talking about Grateful Dead. And, you know, it was just a very different environment. So I started to think about how dispensaries were tailoring their services and their environments to the specific needs of their communities. And that got me thinking that, you know, dispensaries are a great place to collect information. You know, the federal ban on research on cannabis made it very difficult for animal models to become human models and for synthetic cannabinoids to become whole plant medicine. But at the same time, we had tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of Californians that were becoming medical cannabis patients, were going to dispensaries, and were becoming experts in their own right on the medicine. And they knew what strains they preferred, and they knew what smells they were looking for, and they knew which edibles they liked, and they knew which edibles to take before bed, and which edibles you take before you go out in the day. And so really from the patient experience is where we've started to develop clinical applications for medical cannabis. So my current role is the Director of Research and Patient Services for Berkeley Patients Group here in Berkeley, California. We're a dispensary that's been around for 12 years, and we're a community-based dispensary, and we offer a host of holistic health services like acupuncture, chiropractic services, and massage therapy, all free to our patients. And we know that that's a very, very important part of their health and healing because that's what they've told us. So in addition to that, I teach at UC Berkeley, and so I have the opportunity to work with a whole new generation of young folks that are coming into the social and health services field, and to train them on the use of medical cannabis and the use of other alternative health methods. So what I wanted to talk about today, and I do have my computer open because I have a little bit of data. I couldn't come and not have a few numbers for people, because I just wouldn't be a good scientist. But I did want to make this more of a discussion. You know, the people that are in this room right now represent pretty much every facet of cannabis. We have cultivators and farmers, we have manufacturers, we have those that dispense, and we have those that do the science. And so this is the group. This is the group that's going to take this to the next level. So I wanted to generate a discussion today about the intersection of lab research and patient research, and then how we can bring those things together to develop clinical applications for cannabis that are beyond what we're currently using in terms of making recommendations for patients. So I wanted to talk about this framework. It's always good to have an example. So the example I'm going to use to talk about this is the use of cannabis in lieu of alcohol or other illicit substances or prescription drugs. Now, the observation of this behavior, even the observation that people were saying, you know what, I could take a drink, but I would rather use cannabis, or you know what, I don't like the way this prescription medicine is making me feel, so I'm going to use cannabis, came from clinical observations. Pioneers like Dr. Todd McArea were noticing this in their patient populations before we even had NIDA studying about whether cannabinoids can block cravings and receptors for cravings. We had doctors that were noticing that their patients were telling them, I've stopped drinking since I've started using cannabis, or God, I was on Vicodin for so long and now I feel like I can actually get back into life again. And so it really started in the office. It started with doctors' conversations with their patients. So then we had these new lab discoveries that supported what patients were saying. And I attend conferences like the International Cannabinoid Research Symposium, which is a NIDA-sponsored conference. And there you have all your NIDA cannabis researchers who have their synthetic cannabinoids in their labs with their mice and their monkeys. And they're saying, you know what, you're never going to believe this, but we think that cannabis may help people who are addicted to drugs. And we're like, oh, you're kidding. Of course, we've known this. Patients have been telling us this forever. But now the lab science is finally starting to catch up because the discovery of the endocannabinoid system, that maybe there's something else going on. So with together these patient observations and with this lab science, we're starting to refine the clinical applications for cannabis in lieu of alcohol, illicit drugs, or prescription drugs. So one of the things we're noticing, and something I'd like to put out here today, is the difference between the treatment for something and the substitute for something. And I think that the lab science and the patient science have gotten us to a place where we're starting to see there's absolutely a differentiation. So I would like to say today that cannabis is a treatment for drug addiction, and that cannabis can be used as a substitute for prescription medications. And the reason that I think this is because we've been bogged down in this idea that people that are using cannabis instead of alcohol or other illicit drugs are doing so because they want to get high off an alternate substance. And I think even though we see this really promising and interesting research coming out about the lowering of traffic fatalities in states with medical cannabis laws, it still points to cannabis as being a recreational drug substitute for alcohol. But what lab science is showing us is it goes way beyond this. And anecdotally, we all already know this, right? Anti-seizure, anti-nausea, anti-depression, anti-anxiety, all benefits from cannabis, all symptoms of withdrawal and addiction. So now we're starting to see the lab science catch up with what patients are telling us and saying, you know, there's actually something there. There's actually something about cannabinoids that's blocking the receptor that's sending signals for cravings. There's actually something about cannabinoids that's stopping delirium tremens in individuals that have alcoholism. And so I think this is a really great example of how that intersection has helped us refine this behavior to think, you know, maybe this is a treatment. You know, maybe this isn't, you want to get high, don't use alcohol, use cannabis. Maybe this is, you want to reduce your use of a certain substance, we're going to give you cannabis as a treatment for that. And I think that that's something that the recovery community is kind of trying to come to terms with. It took them a long time to accept methadone as a treatment for addiction. And so I do think there's some interest there in how cannabis can be similar to that as a treatment. But there is some pushback. I was very happy to see a discussion on this at the Drug Policy Alliance conference a few months ago about the recovery community and the use of medical cannabis and how can we work together to allow individuals to use this as a treatment for their addiction and not just a, well, if you can't be sober, at least they're just using cannabis, which I think is something that we're seeing discussed more often. So the lab research talks about the use of cannabis for withdrawal symptoms, for craving, for serotonin depletion, and then maybe even most importantly, relapse prevention. For those people that are trying to abstain from alcohol or other illicit drugs, the idea of relapse is a really big factor in whether they're able to be successful. And the use of cannabis to get someone through that moment where they may relapse, I think will go leaps and bounds in terms of helping people stay to their sobriety or reduction program that they're trying to adhere to. So we've got that going on. And then it's a completely separate idea. We have this idea of cannabis as a substitute for prescription drugs. And so that's another area where, unfortunately, we haven't seen the lab science as excited. I think it could have something to do with the pharmaceutical industry. We see scientists like Dr. Abrams that are really starting to investigate the use of cannabis in conjunction with other prescription medicines like opiates and having a much better effect. But I think this is an area where the patients are talking. And this is an area where we really need to listen to what the patients are telling us, because these are folks that are in the thick of being prescribed 5, 6, 7 different prescription medications, and they're desperate to not use them. So one of the things we've been doing is collecting information on patients that are using cannabis as a substitute for prescription drugs. And so just hot off the presses, because I can't avoid not sharing data with you. So recently UC Berkeley approved a study that I worked on with Medican, where we randomly selected 200 patient intake forms and coded them to look and see what the behaviors were of individuals that were coming in to seek medical cannabis recommendations. And I have to give a whole host of thanks to Medican, because they actually were the ones that went through the very laborious process of taking an intake form and making it into data. And then they gave the data to me, and I cleaned it and coded it and got it ready for analysis. So just a few, and this is brand new. No one has ever heard about this before. So of our 200 folks, the demographics aren't going to surprise you. 69.5% male, average age 42.2. When we look at the conditions they're getting recommendations for, 52.3% were physical conditions only, 2.9% were mental health conditions only, and 44.8% were both. And I think this is really key, because of the concerns of mixing prescriptions for physical health reasons and for mental health reasons, and add the additive effects of multiple prescriptions. And we know that physical health has a mental health impact. And when I look at the reasons people are using cannabis, again and again and again, it's pain and insomnia, cancer and anxiety, arthritis and depression, Crohn's disease and depression. And so to say that, physical health maladies exist in a vacuum without the need to work on mental health conditions is to be very short-sighted. And we're seeing that reflected in the data. 68.9% said that they were using cannabis as a substitute for a prescription drug. And this is similar to what we've seen in other surveys. And then 104 of those answered a question about why they were using it as a substitute. So what we're starting to see is there's different dimensions of substitution. On the lower end of the spectrum, we have economic substitution and the fact that they've been using prescription meds for a very long time. And at the higher end, we have side effects. So that's something you see very commonly, the side effects of my medication. I can't stand it. I don't like the way it makes me feel. I am not able to function. And we're actually seeing this more than claims that cannabis is really effective at treating what they need to be treated. It's more that they don't like the side effects of the other treatments that they're given. So how do we take what we learn in the lab and what we learn from patients and make it into a recommendation for use? And so an example I was thinking of recently that I just shared with Martin over lunch is that when you go to a doctor and they evaluate you and they examine you and they're going to give you a prescription medication, they give you a very specific prescription medication. And then you take that to the pharmacist and they fill that with their medicines that they have available to them, that very specific prescription. With cannabis, we've been going to our doctors and they say, I'm giving you a prescription, a recommendation for medicine. And then we take it to the dispensary and we say, I have this recommendation for medicine. And then the dispensary has to figure out, how do you make a recommendation from all the medicines they have available, the tinctures, the topicals, the edibles, the flowers, the indicas, the sativas, the high CBD, the high THC. How do you make that into a clinical recommendation? It's not something we do at Walgreens. We don't bring them a prescription for medicine and then they ask us what's wrong with us, and then they go to the back where they have all their medicines for everything under the sun and decide what's right for us. But that has been how we've been operating. So I feel it really behooves the dispensaries to take this seriously and to really think about how do we utilize the information that is being developed in the laboratories and bring it into the dispensaries and train the people that work in the dispensaries to talk about this medicine in terms of its compounds and terpenes and not in terms of potency. So one of the things that we've been able to do, so just a few more points of data in terms of clinical applications. When we look at the most common benefits people claim from cannabis, pain relief and sleep are definitely the top up there. And then the most common bothersome effect, I wish Fred Gardner would, oh, you're right there, dry mouth. 29.7%, that was the most commonly reported negative effect, followed by 17.7% claiming negative mood disturbance and 23.4% claiming hunger as a negative effect. So knowing that, having that information and training dispensaries to have that information to ask those questions to patients. What's the most common bothersome effect you get from cannabis? And let's find a strain that has different cannabinoid profile that maybe can help you avoid that. So how do we do that? Well, Berkeley Patients Group has just signed on with Halant Laboratories. There's a lot of labs out there, and I'm not here to say that one is better than another because I don't know them all. I know this one because we're working with them. They're out of UC Davis. And they are providing a cannabinoid profile, and I actually have these in my car, so after this I'm going to run and get them, with a bunch of different terpenes and cannabinoids. And then they've evaluated the peer-reviewed research, which is mostly laboratory preclinical research, to see what are some different effects that have been shown to be connected to different compounds. And so what we would love to see, and what our plan is to have an iPad in the lounge of BPG, where patients can go and search by cannabinoid, by symptom, by strain, and it will come up with the results of which strains have been shown to help that symptom or have that cannabinoid. We currently have it in the dispensary. It's related lab report so that patients become more informed and can go up to the counter saying, you know, I really want something that's high in CBG because I have an antibacterial infection. And then behind the counter, we can say this is high in CBG, and we're getting away from that, man, I want something that's really heavy. Are you looking for something daytime or nighttime? And really getting this conversation away from potency, because I think that's part of the reason that cannabis is still so stuck in the recreational drug family, is because of our language around being over-medicated, under-medicated, and to start to talk about this as the complementary and alternative medicine that it really is. So in the future, we'll have patient recommendations based on symptoms and cannabinoids. I love the idea of bringing herbalists into dispensaries to do consultations with patients so that patients can better understand the cannabinoid system and the endocannabinoid system and how it relates to their medical decisions. The cultivation of rare compounds. So there's a cannabinoid THCV, and this is like kind of funny, but so it helps with weight loss. And it's very rare. And I've always said that if we could cultivate a high THCV plant and do a clinical trial to show that it makes you lose weight, cannabis will be legal 48 hours later. So we need people to cultivate these compounds. We need people to understand, besides just these high-level farmers that are really farmer scientists, that there's ways to cultivate cannabis. It's really going to broaden the spectrum and broaden the conversation, and bring it out of the realm of recreational drug use and into the realm of complementary and alternative medicine, which begs the question, and I know I told Alan that I wanted to discuss this today, is the term medical cannabis redundant? And I think it totally is. We don't say medical aspirin, we don't say medical Vicodin, even though maybe we should. Because what we are finding is that for these folks that are saying, what benefits are you getting from cannabis besides the sleep and the pain relief and the substitution for prescription drugs and the anxiety relief, over half are saying relaxation. So to me, that says that cannabis is medical always, and it is similar to other plants that we use for a variety of medical reasons. And so that's kind of where I think we should start today, is, just this medical term. I think it served us when we needed to differentiate ourselves in the past. But I think we've come so far and we're sophisticated enough now that we just know this is a plant. And it's a plant with THC and a whole host of other things that we can start to isolate and make recommendations based on. So that's what I've got to say, and I welcome all of your comments and questions.
Thanks, Amanda. I have a question. I'm just wondering, I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear what your answer is. So the sort of mechanics that you're describing are very different, as you pointed out, than we engage in with our doctors around any other kind of medication. So I assume that this is driven by the necessity that's created by the fact that doctors either don't have the information themselves and or have some liability concerns or other concerns about being more specific in their recommendations to their patients. And so do you think that ideally this would be the kind of consultation and advice that's provided by a physician rather than the very creative method that you've described?
Yeah, I mean, I think that along with that, you'd have to open up the ability to recommend to osteopaths and naturopaths and other individuals that deal in herbal medicine. My concern would be that if we really just went towards the doctors, the MDs, and said, talk about this medicine this way, there may be a whole host of other health professionals that may even be better suited, that work more in herbal medicines, to have this discussion. But that's a huge part of it. I mean, doctor education is so far behind, as I think we've noted before, the late development of the endocannabinoid system. It hasn't been in the medical schools. There is a lot of effort out there right now to develop programs that do offer CMEs and do offer CEUs, not just for doctors, but for other social and health professionals. I'm working to develop a class for UC Berkeley Extension on medical cannabis for nurse practitioners, addictions counselors, everyone that's working in the field. I think the knowledge has to grow in the entire discipline. I think if we put all our effort just on MDs, I think that we're going to be short-sighted. And I think that because even if a doctor knows a ton, if that patient then goes to their psychologist or social worker and is hearing a whole different story, it's really just going to hurt the patient. So we need to really reach out to people that we think may ever have contact with individuals. I just went and had dinner at the Berkeley Fire Department, and they were telling me that most of the calls that they go on around campus are over-medicated students. And so I was like, I'd love to come in and give a seminar to the fire department about what to do. Because they're like, what do? We've just been telling them to watch TV until it wears off. So, I think besides just the healthcare professionals, there's a whole host of professionals out there that come in contact with people who use cannabis. And I think we need to do a big education around for all of them in terms of what it actually is.
That's really interesting. Thanks, because when I was first listening to your response, I was thinking, is she talking about, I'm a lawyer, I think in these terms, is she talking about amending the CUA so that others besides MDs could recommend? And it sounds like, but not necessarily, that doesn't have to happen.
Right.
Before this other broader educational campaign that could be undertaken.
And then who dispensaries bring in? So, there's been a big, it's a big no-no to ever have a dispensary partner up with an MD who's making recommendations. Right. Because, you go to the doctor and they say, then you can go here and get it. And in fact, doctors will rarely, if ever, actually tell a patient where they can actually go get cannabis. Dr. Frank Lucido was my doctor for a long time, and he would always say, all right, here's your recommendation. Go online and Google where to get it. And so I think that there's been kind of that disconnect. What I'd love to see is bringing herbalists into dispensaries for people that already have recommendations so that there isn't that conflict of interest, so that they can sit down and have a consult with somebody that's an herbal medicine expert without this worry that, they're just doing this because they want more patients or, it's some kind of...
Yeah, the other problem for doctors, of course, is that the Conant decision, which protects doctors from the federal government coming after their ability to prescribe medicine, was based on First Amendment right that doctors have to communicate their recommendations to patients. But the opinion talks about the thin line between that kind of a recommendation and aiding and abetting. Exactly. And any doctor who says, and you can go get it here, is much more at risk for even federal prosecution under an aiding and abetting theory. Sue or Lyle, do you have questions for Amanda before I open it up to the floor?
No, I think it was a very good conversation.
Oh, thanks.
Questions from anyone else? Comments, ideas, yes.
I feel like the fire department gets a lot of calls because people smoke too much.
No, it's eating. It's edible. So, on campus, every year we have this rite of passage where a co-op gets a hold of some brownies and 20 of them eat them, and they're not used to eating edibles and they're not labeled, so who knows how much is in them. And then one of them starts feeling a little odd, and then it's like a panic attack among the group, and then they all go to the hospital. It happens every year. I've been at Berkeley since '02, every year. And so the fire department gets called, And actually in response to this, I wrote an article for West Coast Cannabis about what to do if someone you're with eats too much pot food.
And what's your bottom line?
So, okay, the bottom line is do not say things like, oh my God, that happened to me once and it took me 5 days to come down. Do not say, if your heart starts beating really fast, you could have a heart attack. Because people really, the energy around them is basically what they're going to soak in. So what I tell people is encourage them to do things that they already feel really comfortable doing. Watch their favorite movie, watch their favorite TV show, listen to their favorite music, something that's going to bring them into a headspace that's already comfortable and familiar. And then wait it out. Eat something if they can. But really, they used to tell us this about alcohol. The only thing that sobers you up is time. So, that's...
Yeah.
Great presentation, man.
Thanks,
I learned a lot. At Project CBD, and with the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, one of the studies we're thinking of undertaking is CBD as an antidote for cannabis overdose, ? And we've been advised by Europeans with experience that it's probably not the right term, antidote, but anecdotally we've heard from many people using CBD that it will level off the anxiety, that it's helpful. If it doesn't end it, it doesn't end it sooner, but it makes a less uncomfortable experience.
I love that idea. I'd love to do something. Because, okay, so perfect example. This idea, we can do this study in a dispensary. Absolutely. You recruit people that are newer to cannabis, where you think these anxiety reactions may be more prevalent. You give them some CBD and say, if you have an anxiety reaction, take this and tell me what happens. And then you collect information from people that have anxiety reactions that don't have any CBD. See, this is the great thing about patient research, is that the patients are more than willing to do these things. And so the patients, I think, are very key in this, because they want to have the best experience that they can possibly have. They don't want to waste their money, and they don't want to waste their time, and they don't want to waste their health waiting for something that's going to help. So, when dispensaries want to do surveys, when they want to do research, the patient involvement is usually very, very high, much higher than any other social science effort to get people to fill out surveys and give information. So I love that. I think that's a great idea.
Do you have a question? And then
Yeah,
we'll go to Charlie.
I'm wondering what you think about the difference between sativas and indicas. There's this whole folklore about them being two totally different kinds of highs. Has nothing to do with their CBD content, we know. What's there, and has anybody looked at it rigorously?
Well, I think that there was, when the lab testing first kind of came onto the scene, you saw a lot of really outrageously high claims of THC. And so I think that along with that and the sativa indica, there's definitely a cultural component to that. And as the sociologist Howard Becker observed, cannabis is a learned behavior. The high is a learned behavior. And it's very much influenced by expectation effects. And I think that one thing is going on there is terpenes. So there are definitely specific terpenes associated with strains that are claimed to be high sativa, and other terpenes that are associated with claims that are supposed to be strong indica, a lot of times just because the genetics are similar. And anyone that works in a dispensary or goes to a dispensary, when people are choosing medicine, they're smelling it. And so I think there's a component there of smelling something that comes from a family of plants thought to be sativa or indica, where the patient is saying, aha, that's Jack Herrera smell. Sativa, this is going to keep me awake. Oh, that's Romulan smell. Indica, that's going to put me to sleep. And I think that, along with the recommendations we've been giving, which have pretty much been along those lines, I think it's really been adapted into the way people think about cannabis, which has affected how it affects them.
So it's a placebo effect.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, absolutely.
Yeah, in regards to the issue involving edible products, we're seeing it over the last couple of years in our psychiatric emergency room. We've had a number of people come in who said, well, I ate a brownie that had pot in it, but it must have been spiked with PCP. I'm anxious and I'm going crazy right now. And it turns out they just ate too much. I mean, these were novice users. They were told eat a quarter, and they didn't realize they had to wait for it to start getting active, but they're getting a little hungry, so they're nibbling. They end up eating the whole cookie. Then they have trouble with the experience. So I think there's more education needs to be done with the edible products. I'm also wondering about how much variability is there likely to be from edible product to edible product. It's not a consistent dosing. So if someone's accustomed to half a cookie, giving them the desired effect, if it's a more potent cookie, a half may be way too much. This is a concern because we're seeing, particularly with kids who don't have a lot of experience, we're seeing more problems with it.
There's still a wide variety of edible standardization going on. You know, it used to be that you'd walk into a dispensary and you'd see a cookie wrapped in cellophane with no label on it, and you just take your chances knowing that probably something bad wouldn't happen to you. But now we're seeing edibles produced in commercial kitchens that are standardized, that have the exact same amount in each package. But then the question becomes dosing. So, you know, you've all seen these edibles, it's like decadose or quadruple dose, and you're like, what does that mean? So one of the things, at Berkeley Patients Group, we make our own edibles, and we've been using the Sativex dosage, actually, in terms of milligrams to determine what we recommend as a dose. So that's one way to go about it, is to find some dose mechanism that's been standardized outside of this particular arena and use that. And the other thing is to require any edible producer that you're going to sell in the dispensary has to be a standardized producer. And you know, unfortunately, there's a lot of really amazing edible producers out there that I think might get shut out of this market because they don't have the funds to set up a commercial kitchen, but it is a food product. And so, you know, there's a difference between making brownies and packaging them and selling them to the dispensary for consumption and making brownies and bringing them to your family potluck and saying, oh, they're medicated, be careful. I mean, there's a level of risk associated once you start moving into commercial production. So because it is a food product, I think that's where it does have to go. And if we start demanding that our vendors are bringing us that kind of product, that it doesn't just say 4 doses, it actually says how many milligrams are in there and what is a dose. You know, I think that that's going to make the consumer better able to judge what works for them.
Follow up on that, and I've seen some packages, edible packages, that are labeled with dosage. Now, I have one that I saw at home that was advertising 190 milligrams of THC in something that was maybe a triple dose bar or something. Now, the standard dose is like 5 or 10 milligrams top. So, what is that? What's going on here? I mean, I don't trust those numbers, to say the least, but if they were correct, I mean, those would be very dangerous edibles.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. What you're seeing is these edibles that, as the whole package, contain a huge amount. And we've tested these. I mean, some of these things that are claiming this absolutely have that much in them. But then the dosing is like a very small amount of that entire thing. But you made a really good point. A lot of patients don't adhere to that. And you know, now that edibles are actually becoming more delicious, it's even harder to adhere to that. So, you know, I mean, that's a real concern. Like my parents who would eat edibles, and they would always be like, well, it's really easy to only eat a half because it tastes horrible. You can barely get a half down. And now I'm giving them these chocolate bars. I'm like, seriously, Dad, a quarter. I mean it, a quarter. Because they taste so good. And you have people that are confectionaries and people that are pastry chefs and people that their first living is cooking, making cannabis products. So I think you're right that you have to start wondering, is there a limit? Is there a point we're getting to where it's really just, you know, like alcohol that's like 200 proof or something like that? Like, is that really necessary? And if it is necessary for some patients, how do we make sure that it's only being used by people that it's really appropriate for?
Yes.
One of our suppliers tries to standardize it by using a Simpson oil that's pretty standardized and then using 0.2 grams of that material for each cookie, and we've never had any complaints from that particular supplier. Another thing that anybody who ever has a spare moment should just Google police officer who thought he was dead.
Oh, that's my favorite YouTube video.
And Dearborn, Michigan police officer stole the pot from a kid, made it into brownies. He and his wife ate it.
Thought they were dying.
He was sure that he was dead. He could prove he was dead, and he called 911 to tell them that he could prove he was dead. And it's fascinating.
Yeah, we talked about that at the firehouse.
Yes, unbelievable.
It seems like people's body chemistry is really different also, and so weights don't seem to matter, how much you use doesn't really seem to matter. You know, you could have a 300-pound man that smokes every day, and a 100-pound woman that smokes every day, and their dosages could be way different. That 300-pound man could take say one piece of this piece of chocolate and be hallucinating in the corner, and his wife could be giggling and happy and there's nothing going on. And it seems that
It's hard to standardize when everybody reacts to things.
Well, that's why I tell
the
patients.
standardization of the proof, people would be able to figure out for themselves, I react to this much. And
Right,
this
like
much
the
reacts to
bang bar.
that
I
much.
think you're talking about the bang
Yeah,
bar.
he is.
Right.
And like, really, that is one of my favorite edibles out there. And I like it because it's consistent. Every time I buy it, I know what I'm getting and I know how much to take.
Right.
And you get a different chocolate bar for when the munchies come. That's the thing with the edibles. If you're making brownies, you make a batch that doesn't have chocolate.
But I think you bring up a really good point, which is that we always tell our patients that they are their best evaluators. We have a monthly class at BPG on the effects method of cannabis, where we basically teach patients how to keep track of how cannabis affects them, and to keep track of what they're eating or what strain they're using, what time of day it is, really getting in tune with what their bodies are telling them about how that makes them feel, and to keep track. And I said, you'll start to notice patterns. You'll start to notice that when I had this strain in the morning, it was really bad, but when I had it at night, it was great. And because everyone's so different, and because, even the same person on a different time of day is going to have a different effect from cannabis, that individuals are really their best assessors. And so I encourage all patients to keep very detailed notes until they can really, with certainty, decide which is best for them at any given time.
The other question I have too is that we get into things like edibles and these concentrated oils. These are much stronger than the joints we used to smoke in years past, and you do end up having kids end up like in hospital rooms freaking out, having these overdoses or whatever you want to call them. Could that have a really bad backlash on our industry if people are starting to drop like flies off of? Not drop, but it's really
Experience adverse reactions.
Remove themselves from
getting maybe higher than they want to. Can that have a negative backlash on our industry because of the fact that it's not so mundane, or it's not?
It already has. It's not a new thing. There's been kids who have been going to the hospital for overdose or for eating too much pot food since way before there was medical cannabis in California in '96. In fact, it's probably happening a lot less now because people are becoming more sophisticated in their use and they're more aware of what's in what they're eating. So I think that backlash has already happened. I think instead of fighting so hard against that backlash, we just need to pick up our toys and go to a different conversation, which is the complementary and alternative medicine conversation. And I think that instead of trying to engage with people that are like, oh, but there was this kid in the hospital who ate too much pot food, and we're sitting here trying to defend about what was wrong with that situation and how that doesn't always happen, I think we just need to say, yep, that can be an effect of a complementary and alternative medicine, is someone may take too much or take the wrong thing, and then just move on. I think when we get bogged down in trying to defend ourselves, I think that's when we open ourselves up for the most criticism.
Amanda, I was really interested in something you said at near the outset of your talk about, if I understood you correctly, the potential, at least from the self-reports that you're getting from patients, for cannabis to perhaps not just be a substitute, but actually maybe provide some kind of relief or treatment for addiction. And I'm wondering, Howard, you were saying that the California Society of Addiction Medicine has recently come out with a paper similar to the California Medical Association that got so much press attention. I hadn't seen anything about the one from the addiction doctors. Have you seen that? And do they talk about at all this potential?
I haven't. I probably have read the whole report, but I don't remember. I know there's a lot more interest in it. I actually just got an email today from LA County, the LA County Department of Public Health. Their Drug and Alcohol Addiction Division is launching a study on the psychosocial effects of medical cannabis on patients, and wants to use a portion of my survey about the use of cannabis as a substitute for alcohol and other drugs. So I think that it's definitely, there's interest there. It's definitely catching on. This idea is catching on. I think that California organizations are usually the first to, as professionals, to kind of take this step forward, because we've had it in California for longer than any other place. There's still a lot of backlash elsewhere, but I think things are starting to change. I'm going to be presenting on this at the American Psychiatric Association's annual meeting in Philadelphia, and so they are interested in this. These are people that treat folks with drug and alcohol addictions. and they're saying, you know, there may be something here, and not just them, but folks at NIDA. I mean, it's really crazy. You'd almost think sometimes we were on the same team until you remember who they are. Because when they present posters at ICRS, there's a million posters about the potential of cannabis and treating alcoholism and treating addiction to cocaine and treating all these things. And then you say, oh, but it's a medicine then, right? And they say, no, it's not. So, you know, it's really kind of a strange thing. And I think we rely on the professional organizations who are the clinicians to bridge that gap between the lab science and what the patients are telling us.
Right. Yes, Howard, last question for Amanda.
Well, a couple of things. One is, if you search PubMed for cannabis as a treatment for addiction, there's almost absolutely nothing there. There's one report from Todd McUrea of like 80 patients that he surveyed. That's about it. So there's a great need to get something, even if it's an opinion piece from you know, into a PubMed search journal. I met Todd McUrea about 15 years ago, and he had told me that he had recently resigned from the California Society of Addiction Medicine because he had gotten tired of having no luck with discussing these with him. So anyway, he probably would have been interested in this report from the California Society of Addiction Medicine. It was called Youth First. So it was a focus on adolescents, but it was also an agreement with the California Medical Association to legalize adult cannabis. And their argument went like this. They said about 10% of cannabis users become dependent. They probably consider daily use dependency maybe. There's another opinion that it's hygienic use. But anyway, so they say, but they said in adults, the adverse consequences of this dependency in adults is generally less severe, than other addictive drugs. But with adolescents, they said again, only 10% or so become dependent, but that the consequences are more severe. So they feel that in any kind of legalization strategy, there has to be mandated tax revenues for adolescent treatment, which is extremely underfunded. I mean, all substance abuse treatment is underfunded, but probably adolescent is even more so. And it has to be a different kind of treatment that's normalized in schools and where it's not stigmatized, things like that. So.
Thanks. All right, I think it's about 1:50, and that will bring us to our next presenter. Thank you very much, Amanda.
You're very welcome.